Have the, oh, there it is. It is officially recording. Perfect. So again, you are here to learn a little bit more about the HETAC services. In particular, today we have the pleasure of having two presenters, Leanne Wheeler and Carmina Barales, and they will have the pleasure to share and provide technical assistance with regards to supporting children and youth experiencing homelessness using Title I Part A funds. Take it away, Leanne and Carmina. Oh,
Thank you, Alejandra. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Yes, it's a hot day in California, regardless of where you are. So northern, southern, and central, and hopefully it's our last 100+ day today. Thank you so much for being here. As Alejandra indicated, this information will be posted on the HETAC website, and you will get the materials in a week or so. And Denise will be sending out the PowerPoint to those that have registered. The purpose of our day is to talk about the purpose of Title I Part A reservation funds, the intersection between Title I and our homeless education McKinney-Vento. We also will talk about the requirements and the reservation piece, how to determine those funds at your LEA, because it's a really important time of the year to start talking about the needs of those students, what you can actually do with these Title I funds, reporting the use of these funds, and actually how much you spend and reserve, and how to evaluate that from year to year. And then Carmina and I will also go through some frequently asked questions. So I'm going to have her unmute and start us off. Carmina?
Hi, everybody. As Leanne said, we are here to cover the homeless education reservation that is required under Title I Part A. We hope that if you are a liaison, this will help empower you and provide language to do this work with leadership, staff in your business and fiscal. And I think with that, we can go ahead and get started.
Great. Thanks, Carmina. As many of you know, if you have heard any of us, we always try to start off with an acronym page so that we're not, in the alphabet soup and drowning. So we will be talking about the Consolidated Application and Reporting System, which we call CARS. We're all very much familiar with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, free and reduced price meals, which is FRPM. We've already talked about our HETACs, our Homeless Education Technical Assistance Centers. Most of you are an LEA, which means you're a local educational agency, which encompasses county offices of education, school districts, and charter schools. And then the California Department of Education, or CDE, is considered to be a state educational agency, or an SEA. And most of the information that we are going to be providing to you today has been cited under the United States Code, or USC. Next slide. So we're going to jump right into why this is so important. The purpose of Title I Part A is to provide children with a fair, equitable, and high quality of education, and to hopefully close that educational achievement gaps. That's why we're in here we're all in education, is to help to serve and support all children. And this is really about our homeless education students. Title I Part A is designed to meet the educational needs of low achieving children in schools with the highest levels of poverty by aligning high quality assessments, systems of accountability, teacher preparation, curriculum, and instructional materials with the challenging state academic standards. These funds are to support schools in implementing program goals, provide supplemental funds to LEAs and schools with high number or high percentages of children from low-income families, which of course constitutes our homeless children and youth in California. Next slide. So basically, we're going to talk about Title I, but we're also going to talk about McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which is the section 11431. We're going to call that the McKinney Act. And this act, since 1987, has been put into place to ensure that children and youth experiencing homelessness has the same access to free, appropriate public education, including our public preschool education and related services as their permanently housed peers. We want them to make sure that they have the equal opportunity to meet the same challenging academic standards. Basically, we want to put ourselves out of a job, right? Next slide. The McKinney-Vento Act requires not only LEAs, but SEAs to remove barriers to the identification, the enrollment, the attendance, and the success in school for children and youth experiencing homelessness. The McKinney-Vento Act emphasizes collaboration and parent participation as a critical part of the educational success of students experiencing homelessness. McKinney-Vento and Title I both should play a significant role in supporting the academic achievement of these students. And there is requirements both on the McKinney side as well as the Title I side to require that coordination and collaboration. Next slide.
So now going into that Title I Part A homeless reservation, there to continue that tie, the language that Leanne was just sharing, there is some nuances between the two. So students who are identified as homeless eligible are automatically eligible for all Title I services, regardless of their current academic performance. So all of your students that are identified by you as the liaisons fall under the umbrella of all the services available under Title I. Homeless students enrolled in schools not receiving Title I Part A funds are entitled to the academic support and any comparable services to the students that are receiving those Title I Part A services. Due to the many and varied needs of students experiencing homelessness, the Title I Part A services that are provided to these students may be greater in scope and intensity and differ in nature than those normally provided to non-homeless students. That last bullet is really important because what we're really saying in layman's terms is that there are times when your Title I Part A funds will not cover the adequacy and the needs of your students who are experiencing homelessness. So that's the point of today is yes, they fall under the Title I Part A and all of those services and everything, but there's going to be additional things that your students who are experiencing homelessness to be at that comparable service level that will need more. So if we go on to the next slide. All LEAs that are receiving Title I Part A funds must include in their local plans the description of how the LEA's Title I Part A program is coordinated with McKinney-Vento. If this is the first time you're hearing that, it's okay. It's okay. You heard it now. You can connect with your county office of education and figure out how do I make sure that that is happening. If a school site is hearing that, connect please with your school district and find out what is that coordination look like and how do I actively participate and roll it out on my school site. If you're a COE and you need our support on how to make sure your districts fully understand this. That second bullet talks about what local plan and what does it mean to include timely and meaningful consultation with your local liaison. This is also included in federal and state requirement of that consultation. And what does that look like? We say all the time that we do for and with our students, not to our students. And we expect that same level of respect for our liaisons. We cannot talk about our homeless students experiencing homelessness without talking to the person who is directly responsible for their eligibility and services. That reporting is done through CARS on the CDE platform for CARS. The next slide. So Title I Part A, there is a requirement for a specific set aside or reservation of funds specifically for these comparable services. And that is regardless of their school of attendance, including funding the local liaison position, and funding transportation to and from school of origin. So a lot of times we'll hear, well, we don't have any homeless students, so we don't make a reservation. Well, that's unacceptable because the requirement is to make that set aside. And it can, as it's stated, be supporting the local liaison position, funding transportation to and from school of origin. So you'll hear both set aside, homeless set aside, or reservation funds for homeless education.
Thanks.
The next slide, Leanne.
So what we are trying to do both with the HE tax and the California Department of Education is make sure that our PowerPoints are data driven to some extent. So Denise, could you share the next slide? This is some statewide data from our 23-24 Consolidated Application and Reporting System, or CONAP or CARS implementation page. We're going to get into that page a little bit later, but I wanted to give you some information just to kind of get you thinking about this. CARS, there was 1,904 LEAs that submitted the 23-24 homeless education implementation page for 23-24. Of those 1,900 school districts, they combined receive $1,919,651 or $651,735. That's such a big number, I can't even say it. That's how much Title I funds these 1,900 school districts have received. Of that $1.9 billion, $31,311,000 was reserved for our 250,000 homeless children and youth, so to speak. Unfortunately, not all of that was spent. $29 million, which is pretty good. Of the 1,900 school districts or LEAs, over 540 expended zero. So that means that 1,500 LEAs spent the $29 million. With Census Day, I used a Census Day because it's better and easier at this point, of 210,000, that's $137.92 per child per year. So it's a lot better than what we get for our education for homeless children and youth funding, but we certainly would like to see that number go up. You can't do a whole lot with $137 per kid, especially when you're talking about the different services that we are required to provide to our homeless children and youth. Next slide. So we're talking $1.9 billion, and that is one great reason to start collaborating with your Title I state and federal program person. If you're a homeless liaison, you need to find out who that person is. you need to take those two programs and really try to facilitate some strong collaboration. Encourage your Title I coordinators and your local liaisons to work together. Develop a plan, implement that plan of how you're going to reserve these funds, how you're going to use these funds, what are the needs of your homeless children and youth. Collaborate with one another to develop and implement a plan. Next slide. Some other suggestions would be to make sure that you ensure that the needs of our highly mobile students are included in school improvement plans and not considered a separate issue. It's not just those kids over there. These kids are part of your student body and they should be they should be included. Provide training for both state and federal Title I and McKinney-Vento. Give that to your secretaries, give that information to your principals. Do this as a collaborative. It's stronger in numbers. Share Title I Part A and homeless education resources and handbooks relating to the high poverty. Data is always an important piece. Share that with anybody that is willing to listen and hear. Next slide. I think that another big piece is making sure that the information on your district-wide policies, your procedures, and your guidelines really focus on that identification and service of homeless children. Title I mentions homeless education. Homeless education mentions Title I. So those policies and procedures should be both mentioning each other. Use the data to help get your point across. Determine the appropriate use of funding, how much you should actually reserve, and we're going to go into that piece next. And then obviously share the data within and across your LEAs in regards to the needs of your homeless children and youth, to build that awareness, to build that that understanding, and to break down those silos. Next slide. Last point, when it comes to the collaboration between both Title I and homeless education, if you haven't heard me before speak, you're hearing it now. This law has everything to do with meeting the needs of homeless students and building relationships. And it always is an important piece to build that relationship. The more people that you know that understand the accommodations that these children should get is an important piece. They need transportation. They need to stay in their school of origin. How do you transfer records in a quick manner? Consider their class scheduling. Consider special services or projects that they might need as it relates to the enrollment, the attendance, and success of school. Cross-program interaction enables LEAs to respond to the emerging needs of homeless children and youth and helps to ensure their success in academics. That's the bottom line. We want to help get these kids up and out of their poverty state. Next slide. So the next 3 or 4 slides talks about strategies or ways that you can determine this reservation amount or this set aside amount. These are merely strategies. If you have your own way and you feel like it's already adequate, great. Don't need to really take note of this. But if you don't know or don't have a strategy and you don't think that your set asides is enough, so maybe look at these and maybe consider using all of them, part of them, a portion of them. It's really up to the LEA to determine the amount. It's not a formula driven allocation. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing. But it should be based on the total Title I Part A allocation of the LEA, and it should be taken right off the top. You as an LEA should establish your own method of determining it. And as Carmina indicated, you really should be reaching out to your homeless liaison or other stakeholders that might have some input on how much money should be set aside. Next slide. So when determining the set aside an amount, the Title I state and federal program or the Title I director and the liaison should partner together. The liaison should bring to the table the needs of the homeless students. How many homeless students? What might be their needs? Do they need PE clothes? Do they need transportation? Having that data will only make your case stronger. You should allow for provisions of services that might meet the unique needs of homeless children and youth outside and above Title I services. So when Carmina goes over the allowable uses of Title I funds, you'll be really surprised that some of those don't necessarily fit in the box of your Title I Part A funds. Next slide. So here are some possible ways of calculating your set-asides. You base the set-asides on a needs assessment of students experiencing homelessness within the district, considering both the number of students and their needs. And remember, don't forget those 0 to 5-year-olds or those unaccompanied youth that maybe are not enrolled, because these funds can reach out to those kids as well. Determine a percentage of the district's Title I funds to reserve. So if you, I do a percentage across the top. I know when I started this job 25 years ago or 20 years ago, we would always say at least 1% off the top of your Title I reservation funds. Well, now the federal government talks about that our homeless population should be anywhere between 5 and 10% of our free and reduced lunch count. So you could even consider that. Multiply the number of students experiencing homelessness by your per pupil allocation of Title I. So if you get $100 per kid and you've got, 50 kids, you do 100 times 50 and you reserve that. Is that enough money, $100? I don't really think so. Next slide. If you are a LEA that receives the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth sub-grant dollars, this could be a way to match that. A lot of times your EHCY funds is not enough, but it is a supplement. And so you could definitely do a match there. I think all of us are very much aware of where our homeless students, what they have been receiving in the last 2.5, 3 years with ARP. So you have a good sense of maybe what funds should be, how much you should reserve. It's important for you to analyze your data and your reservation amount and look at last year's and think, did we meet those needs? Did we not meet those needs? Look at the students' academic outcomes and educational needs. Look at the community's poverty level or the economy. As we are, as rent is going up, we're seeing more students that are identified as homeless. So your percentage or your amount of Title I reservation funds might or should be increasing. California is always dealing with some sort of natural disasters and emergencies. So that is another reason why you might want to set aside some money for those families that are displaced due to natural disasters or emergencies. And then, of course, analyze your free and reduced lunch data by comparing it to homeless enrollment. And like I said earlier, the federal government talks about that it should be between 5 and 10% of your free and reduced lunch population. I think I might have 1 or 2 more slides. So it is important to note, and this is something that comes from the United States Department of Education, that if the number of students experiencing homelessness enrolled in your LEA changes significantly within your school year, you can certainly make changes both at the fiscal and the programmatic levels. You can increase it due to the emerging needs of these children and their families. You could, as I said, you can increase it due to natural disasters or a pandemic or a fire. There's no reason why you can't do that. And that's one of the wonderful things that we've been able to do over the course of the years, is be able to tell LEAs, hey, use your Title I reservation funds. Don't wait for, FEMA to come in. Use these funds to help support these families. And then remember, if you don't spend all those funds at the end of April or March or April, when you're starting to look at the next year, you can always put that money back in and add it to your carryover. Next slide. Turning it over to you, Carmina.
Yes, so now that you fully understand the law, the requirement, both what's expected of our districts, county offices, charters, with these Title I Part A federal funds at both the state requirement and the federal requirement. And then we've gone into how do you decide what that set aside is? I know that's always the next question, and Leanne did a great job going through that. So just to help, you could do a needs assessment, you could base it on past practice, but you would have to know, just like I shared earlier, you will have to know what can I do for students with these dollars. Again, I want to reiterate that it's different and it encompasses farther reach than your typical Title I Part A uses. And that's really important to note, and that's why we have this conversation. So here's, and it's a pretty exclusive, kind of exhaustive list. There's what you can and cannot do with these funds. Again, remember, this is part of federal language, USC code section. So it's very clear that items of clothing, especially anything that's determined as a need for school dress. So if your school has a dress code, uniforms, PE outfits. Remember, these are students who may not have access to their own closet, their own dresser door, laundry. So they may need an extra outfit for PE. That all helps with preventing bullying or, disclosing some very private information about themselves. Another thing that's not a typical use for Title I funds is caps and gowns for graduation. I remember having this conversation with a charter school when I shared this list, and they said, oh my gosh, we've been paying for it out of pocket. I had no idea I could help support my students through these funds. This is part of that comparable services. A lot of our housed students have families and parents who are able to provide these things for them. And so the other one is immunizations. These are required for school enrollment, so they're super important. Medical, dental, hearing aids, and eyeglasses. I know there's a lot of wonderful partnerships happening at schools for a lot of these, but know that if there is like a copay or something that's preventing that family and that child to have something that they need for their learning, that this is an allowable use. In the next slide, these bullets continue. If there are any outstanding student fees, to help the student participate in different class projects or programs. There was some legislation that includes after-school programs or some of the like spring break or winter break activities. Personal school supplies, backpacks, notebooks, that it's an amazing opportunity to be able to support students in that way. Other forms that are needed by families for school enrollment, such as birth certificates, sometimes there's a minimal fee on making a copy or getting the copy from a certain agency. Food that's purchased through the day, you know, it's an opportunity for teachers to have kind of a little stipend or a little box of granola bars in every classroom for some of those students. And of course, for all of you who say we don't have any homeless students, or so we don't have to make this reservation. Well, everybody who is Title I receiving will have at least a handful of students who is experiencing homelessness. And so supporting the homeless liaison position is important in ensuring not only that you are fully complying with the federal and state laws, but that you're supporting families. You can use the funds as well to collect data on ensuring that there is academic progress and success in some of these students. In the next slide, I believe it could, yep. Of course, transportation. I do want to share, there's been a few questions around transportation. We do have very specific guidance and resources around transportation, both on our website. There is a PowerPoint slide for you to go through and maybe even share with your own transportation department. But our wonderful HETAC partners have a ton of resources, recorded webinars, briefs and information, sample MOUs or anything kind of forms that you need. The last 3 bullets here are counseling services in order to support our students that may be experiencing some anxiety or other feelings that will impede their learning. Outreach services to students living in shelters, motels, and other temporary residences. This goes back to that last bullet in the last slide around data. Do you have families who are having the same address, or that have an address that is a known shelter, motel, or hotel? So a shared position within your data division to support some of your work would be helpful. And of course, that last bullet, extended learning time I shared before and after school, Saturday classes, summer school, any of those breaks to help compensate for the lack of quiet time for homework in shelters, overcrowded, you know, all our students who are doubled up. I don't know about you all, but I don't know that I would be able to function and do my job well in a shelter or a hotel. That's not accommodated for learning and adequate. And I believe we have one more slide around uses of funds. Yes. Of course, tutoring services. We have LEAs who have partnerships with shelters, local shelters, and other locations where there's a lot of students who are experiencing homelessness and making that connection. So then you are going to them versus them, those families or students having to coordinate in other tutoring places. Parental involvement. We are talking about specifically the needs that parents have around their students. What specifically do our parents who have students who are experiencing homelessness, what are their needs? And vice versa, ensuring that our parents who have students who are experiencing homelessness are directly being outreached and connected to all the other services. You know, we shouldn't overlook the fact that they too will need to know how to get into college. They too will need to know, how do I ensure that my 3rd grader is reading? All of those things, that there is an intent in reaching out to the parents and families of our students. That last bullet talks about any fees that are associated with a lot of the after college, or after high school kinds of needs for our students. There's often a lot of a lot of times programs that will help with that, but anytime we have the opportunity as educators to step in and support our students with anything that's regarding testing, advanced placement testing, you'd be really surprised how great our students are and dedicated to ensuring that they change the trajectory for their future. And education is the key for that. Don't know if we have one more slide around that. So if you want a handy dandy one pager, we at the CDE have developed a one pager, and this is the link to that one pager. It's not technically one page. If you print it front and back, maybe it is. It has the federal language that states this is a requirement for Title I, because as a dedicated liaison, the first thing you might hear is, no, we don't. You can have the language of, yes, we do. We are required to reserve a portion of our Title I funds. And then they might say, well, what do you think you're supposed to do with that? Or question the way that you want to spend those funds. There is the full list that I just went through. And it has also a very short snippet, very high level, but very important responsibilities of the district. These are not the responsibilities of the homeless liaison. We ensured properly to make sure that these are the responsibilities of the district themselves. We're not calling out homeless liaisons here. We're calling out the district themselves. So in your own board policies, as the superintendent or as the director, this is the responsibility of our district. And I, as the liaison, can help fulfill these in this way. So those are the three major things that this one pager includes on there. And then the next slide. There is, and I believe this is on that one pager as well. There are actual specifics that are not allowable with these Title I Part A reservations. It is not rental assistance. We have housing partners that receive billions with the capital B to be able to help support these families. Our role is education. We are not able to provide clothing assistance for parents or guardians. We're specifically serving the eligible student. That does include some of our 0 to 5 kiddos, but not parents and guardians. Unfortunately, it's also not allowable for the cost of certain extracurricular activities like prom dresses, sports, or yearbooks. And lastly, we are not able to use these funds for physical exams to participate in sports. All of these are not allowable under Title I Part A, but there are opportunities for community-based organizations or partnerships, or many times your county office of education can support some of these needs. Next slide. Is this me? Sorry. It is. Okay. So then we've talked about the requirement, the allowable uses. And so now you've had that full conversation. You fully understand, okay, I know how much our set aside is. I know what we're doing. You are required to report all of this to the CDE. We at the CDE then take all of this reporting information and submit it to our federal partners at the Department of Education. They too make sure that we are doing our due diligence. So it's a two-part in CARS. There's 2 submissions. One is a winter release, which means there's a submission during the winter, typically mid-January to end of February. And then the second reporting section is in the spring release in the May to June. It's important that you know who is responsible at your district for reporting in CARS. Sometimes that is your Title I director, sometimes it is not. So that's a really important thing to find out if you're fairly new or new to your district, who does the CARS reporting. So in that winter release, what happens is there's an automatically generated Title I Part A amount in CARS, and you are asked to report what your allocation and reservation is. So that's the time that you say, when Leanne was sharing, that's the time that it's automatically populated. You get 1.2 million for your district. We're going to set aside 10,000, 30,000, whatever it is that you've determined as a district. In the next slide, now we're getting into what happens in the spring. So in the spring, remember that's in the mid-May to end of June. So what happens in that time is the auto-populated is already their amounts. And now we're asking you, what have you done with those funds? We're asking, who is your homeless liaison contact to provide that information? This is how we keep up with who is the homeless liaison in case there is a parent inquiry, an inquiry at the federal level. If we are looking for any other additional reporting, your county office may need to know that. We need to know how much of the full-time equivalent of the work that the homeless liaison, what portion of that is coming out of the Title I Part A set aside, so for salaries for that position. And lastly, the Title I Part A set aside expended amount. Sorry, I kind of went backwards on that. So this is where you report how much of what you reserved did you actually spend. As Leanne shared, many districts did make a reservation. And when it came time to report how much of that reservation was spent and how, on what activities, we got a 0. So it's really important for our districts not only to take an appropriate amount of time to find out how much is an appropriate set aside, but also describe in detail how much was spent and how it was spent. A couple more bullets of what you'll be reporting in that spring release on that next slide. We ask about when your homeless education board policy approval date was. So every single school district and county office has board policies and administrative regulations. We are asking, when is the date? What's the date of your last board approval? This also is part of our risk assessment for federal program monitoring. It needs to be updated at least to match the latest updates of both federal and state law. So there should be no NCLB language. There should be an abundance of language around the role of consultation with your liaison on local planning documents and plans. There should be extensive information around the housing questionnaire and other legislative changes that have happened both at the state and federal level. Training and participation. It is part of the requirement to ensure that certain level of partners are being trained. Teachers, principals, school counselors. So that is where and so many times we forget about ourselves. Our homeless liaisons themselves must also continue to receive training. I think that is the hardest one to ensure that is checked, but it's also thanks to our HETAC partners and our county offices throughout the state, it is also the easiest one to complete. We have numerous trainings. And the last 2 bullets are specifically for your students. There was an update in a California Education Code requiring the dissemination and administration of the housing questionnaire at least annually, We have a full webinar, a recorded webinar, guidance, FAQs. It's already translated in different languages. The California Department of Education specifically met with SIS providers, student information system providers, for online administration. So any questions, this should not be a barrier. It's an opportunity to identify more students. Speaking of identification, our poster dissemination. Your poster can be accessed online, virtually downloaded. You can get free copies from us. We'll mail them right to you. A lot of your county offices have taken a proactive approach to that, and you can get them from them as well. It's important that our LEAs involve the homeless liaison with doing the CARS page, as I said before. So as a liaison, please find out who is filling out the CARS, and visit the CD CARS website that's on there in your slide to find out more information or more detailed information about, different reporting periods and what is being asked. And I'll switch it back to Leanne.
Thanks, Carmina. So I have this a few slides. When Carmina was talking about the homeless education implementation page in CARS, this is somewhat what it looks like. And it's a really important piece. As Carmina indicated, we do use this for technical assistance, for professional development, as well as for a risk assessment for FPM, or federal program monitoring. But it will ask you, the pre-populated from the winter would be your total Title I allocation. And it's also pre-populated from the winter of the amount of money that you actually reserved. What you then have to do, or the person that completes your consolidated application or your CARS page, is you indicate how much you actually expended or encumbered for that year and what you used it for. Again, this is an accountability piece. And so this is what it looks like. And there should be no concerns, with why you didn't spend anything. We do ask that if an LEA does report zero expenditures, we ask them why. And I have to tell you, the answer isn't because we don't have any homeless students. That isn't an answer that will suffice. We look for answers such as, we supported our homeless students with transportation, school supplies, dissemination of whatever, through other forms, other resources. We used our ARP HCY funding. Well, you're not going to be able to use that excuse anymore because ARP HCY is done with. But you can certainly use other resources, general funds, donations. I know a lot of you are asking about food in Title I. Yes, you can use Title I funds for food. And, you kind of don't ask, don't tell. You decide what needs to happen. But we always suggest that you exhaust all other resources before purchasing food, purchasing things that maybe you can get through donations, through your community agencies, your faith-based organizations, those things. Next slide. This is you again, Carmina.
Of course. Sorry about that. So it's important to make sure that you're evaluating, because as we shared earlier, every spring, every fall, every winter and spring release, you'll be asked to answer these questions and make these determinations. So a couple of questions that we thought are important for you to annually talk and discuss these things is the Title I Part A set aside for homeless education sufficiently meeting the needs of these students? So are you continually finding that you're needing to reach out to other resources, other community organizations? We all know how many community organizations, community-based organizations have either dwindled or increased since COVID. And so our determination should do the same. How does your LEA know that those needs are being met? Are you doing a needs assessment? Are you following up with families? Are you checking in with them? Hey, I offered you this resource. Is that working? Things like that need to be done. And then how much of the set aside is being spent? If you're not spending all of it, why? I'm going to call out some really amazing districts that in the past were kind of red flagged for continually making a large reservation without expending it. And what we found out in our conversation with them is they had one very, very devastating fire in their community. And at that point, they found out it was impossible to support and fill the need for all the students and their families that year through this set aside. And every year since then, as a kind of determination, they have set aside the dollar amount that was needed and that they felt was appropriate to meet the needs of those families. They hope to never need to reach that dollar amount again, but they have made that determination in order to be prepared. So if there is something like that, you need to explain the why. In the past, we've accepted things like we made a very small reservation amount because we had a large amount of ARP HCY funds that supported this work. So we didn't need to have a large Title I Part A reservation. We all know we are well past September 30th, and that is not an option. So we'll be going back to our pre-HC ARP determinations and risk assessment. So you need to make sure that you are explaining the why for your determination. In the next slide, a couple more questions that we think will be helpful is, are you comparing academic outcomes or other outcomes for our students compared to their peers who are non-homeless? Are you investing more in tutoring or transportation or support with sports or different projects to ensure that they are at the level of their peers? And you can compare data from one year to another. Also, the determination of that set aside. I did see in the chat a couple of those questions. I know we talk a lot about per pupil amount, and that's just one way that we ourselves can manage that determination as appropriate. But there is nationally known and well within research and our partners at the U.S. Department of Education that 5 to 10% of our free and reduced price meal count is a good way to gauge that. And I think we will go into that in a little bit. So I don't want to go too much into that. So we do have suggestions of how to determine that set aside. So another one is the homeless liaison a part of the discussion, or is this just sticking at the budget and fiscal conversations? Or is it just at the leadership level? Our homeless liaison will be able to tell you because they know what mom is saying her child needs, is having conversations with the student, telling them, I need more hygiene supplies. I'm having a hard time getting a good grade in PE. I've gotten 2 notices about my uniform and I'm not sure what to do about that. I need a better way to wake up in the morning. Can I get an alarm clock? Those are the things and the conversations that our liaisons hear, and it is unequitable both to our homeless liaison and our families to make determinations without them. That last bullet, there is an opportunity to do a per pupil amount. And, earlier we talked about $137. I don't know about you all, but that's probably a backpack and a couple of other supplies. That's not sufficient for transportation. It's not sufficient for more than one uniform or a PE. it's not sufficient for a lot of things that these funds are allowable for. We'll go on to the next slide. So we have Leanne now.
You can go ahead and do it. That's fine. The next couple slides are resources. I did put these resources obviously in the chat box. We will be providing you the handouts, and this will be recorded. This is being recorded and will be up on the HETAC website in about a week or so. So everybody that signed up for this presentation will get the actual PowerPoint. We might generate some FAQs, those kind of things. So these are the resources. And then I think the next slide is more resources centered around the HETAC's website. So they have obviously links to the California Department of Education, the National Center for Homeless Education, and Schoolhouse Connection as it relates to the Title I Part A. Look into those, tag those, and look at ideas and suggestions. A lot of your questions will generate answers through these resources. I think that they do a really good job with the tip sheets, the briefs, giving you some guidance. So spend some time talking or thinking about your Title I funds, because this is a sustainability piece for your children and youth that are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. So the next few slides, Carmina and I are going to kind of go back and forth. These are some FAQs. You know, can LEAs use Title I Part A funds to pay for the homeless liaison? Anybody? Anybody? Carmina, what do you think?
Yes, of course.
So I think it's important that you, and if you want to go, Denise, to the answer, yes, the Title I funds can be used to fund all or part of the homeless liaison salary, as long as the duties are equal to that percentage. So, for example, if you are half-time homeless and half-time foster, then your Title I reservation funds for homeless education should only pay for half your salary. Now, if you're 100% homeless, you can say, okay, you know, Title I reservation funds pay for half of your salary, and general funds pays for half of your salary. So you can't have it backwards, that Title I pays for all of your salary, but you're doing 2 or 3 other jobs that do not include homeless education. In our larger LEAs, with a significant number of identified homeless students identified and enrolled, you might also use your Title I funds to support your local liaison, additional staff. You know, maybe an outreach worker, maybe some of your site liaisons. You can definitely use these funds to help generate those extra help on the ground.
Data.
Next, data. Use that data. Yep. And she doesn't even like that word. She does not a number person. So next slide. Is there a required amount that has to be set aside each year? Yes, no, maybe so. No, the answer is not. There is not a set aside. However, should be based on a needs assessment. It should be looking at your student enrollment and other local factors. You should be talking to your homeless liaison. And you should know that this is part of the federal monitoring review. And this is probably one of the #1 items that we find out as a notification of finding, that LEAs either are not reserving it, not doing what they're supposed to be doing with them. So get on top of it and look and see what your LEA is doing. And if you need resources around that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Next question.
And I feel like that last question was a little tricky. So there is a requirement to make the reservation, but there's no requirement on the amount. So I hope that's very clear. There's no requirement about how much. There's not like a little formula, or it has to be $2 per kid or any of that. We're allowing you local control into making that determination. So on this next question, can you use Title I Part A to pay for caps and gowns? Oh, look. Ms. Laguna, hi, Paola, Norma. I'm calling you guys out because you said yes. Good job. That was on our list. Go to the next slide. Yes. So if you said no, it's all good. That's why we have a list. We knew you would need a list.
So Carmina,
yeah.
why does Title I get to pay for caps and gowns, but not for a yearbook?
That's not fair, Leanne.
So
Well, because it's goes back to some of that comparable services. It's not appropriate to restrict a student based on their homelessness and segregate them that way, denying them the privilege of being able to walk with their peers in a ceremony versus something that's more social or not related to something that they have really truly accomplished. A graduation is a recognition of their work, of their determination, regardless of their circumstances. And a yearbook is not that recognition. It's a social, and I understand that it could be determined, kind of singled out, but y'all, I'm one of 6 kids, and I know my parents were like, you are not getting the yearbook. So that has nothing to do with your determination or eligibility.
you can
Yeah.
always reach out to your community agencies to adopt or not adopt, but sponsor a homeless child or youth that is graduating to help pay for maybe those extracurricular, extra stuff. It's not extracurricular, but like the yearbook and prom dress or a haircut or getting the nails done or whatever else. So. And then the ASB or the PSTA, those are kind of high school admittance cards that allow them to get into games, to be a part of it and be a part of school, doing the extracurricular activity. And to me, I would say, yes, that would be appropriate use of Title I funds because it helps them engage. Last question is the next slide. What if we do not have any identified homeless students? Do we still have to reserve Title I Part A funds? Ooh, good job. I see a lot of yeses. Yeses, and you're absolutely right. Reservation is required, regardless of the number of homeless students identified. It can, as Carmina said, it can support the role of the homeless liaison. It could also be used in emergency situations when California goes through its fire season or mudslides, or if we had, God forbid, another pandemic. Those families that are displaced due to natural disasters, that's where you can immediately tap into these funds. So nicely done. Last slide. I know we have generated a lot of questions and answers in the chat box. I believe that we have answered most of them. There were a lot of questions around food. There were a lot of questions around transportation being a comparable service. I think when in doubt, check in with your state and federal person, look at the list, reach out to a HETAC, reach out to us. And I think also, if there's any concern, the best thing to do is see if you can find the resources out in your community. There's always companies that are looking to sponsor, to assist. and do some great sleuthing in your Google or in your, in your search engine for little grants. Or I know I talked to somebody about actually going for a nonprofit, and the LEA actually will be a nonprofit to receive donations and be able to have that and make it a lot cleaner. Denise, I know that Lizette has her hand up. I don't know if we can unmute her or if you can just put it in the chat. If a family is now living in a home, parent and child, 5 bedrooms, 3 bath, was tagged homeless at the beginning of the school year, are they still considered McKinney-Vento today? So a homeless student that lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency, if they have determined that they are homeless based on the housing questionnaire, and you now know that they are permanently housed. I mean, to me, a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house seems pretty adequate, but I have no idea who's living there. If this is, are they doubled up or tripled up? Is this due to economic hardship? There's a lot of things that probably need to be asked before an answer. But if they have moved from a homeless situation into a permanent placement, they would continue to have those services until the end of the academic school year. So, does the housing questionnaire require signatures? Carmina?
Yeah, great question. So I know I shared earlier around the housing questionnaire that we do have a PowerPoint and a webinar. I believe the webinar is posted to the HETAC website. We also have a guidance document that accompanies that change in legislation and frequently asked questions. So that is one of the FAQs, and it's a very important one. So I'm glad that you asked. The signature line is on there, but it is not required. There is no under penalty of perjury language that it's unacceptable. You'll notice it's removed from our form. A lot of times, liaisons will have conversations with families, and there's absolutely no need to re-traumatize the family and ask them to even complete the form at all. The liaison can mark it up and say, had phone conversation, talked to mom, was referred by a teacher. There's no need to re-traumatize a family. It is merely an identification tool, and that is required now in law. So it is yours to make your own following the components that are required in the law. So the signature is not required.
Another question was about hotel accommodations for a family. Unfortunately, Title I funds cannot be used for motel or hotel vouchers, as we were able to do with ARP HCY funds. So at this point, for any resources, I would go to your continuum of care, your housing authority within the school district or the county to get some sort of resources.
Community-based organizations, faith communities. There was also a question around gift cards with Title I Part A funds. We don't have language of whether that's allowable or not. Gift cards are a local procedure that is determined at the LEA level. We do have resources if your LEA feels that that's an appropriate way to serve and support families. We have some gift card guidance. And I believe that word gift card is used differently.
Prepaid debit cards
There you go.
is the name of it now. We don't want to confuse people with, and here is, that was the HETAC, I'm sorry, HETAC prepaid Right, gift cards. Resource. If a student was homeless in 23-24 school year with mom, but grandma was recently granted guardianship, is that student still considered homeless? It has nothing to do with the guardianship piece. It has everything to do is his or her nighttime residency fixed, regular, and adequate. I'm assuming that grandma's house is fixed, regular, and adequate, and with the guardianship, I would assume, but I would ask further questions looking at the condition of the home. If it's fixed, regular, and adequate. And it's probably more about the adequate piece. Oh, yes, Denise, I'm so sorry. Go to the next slide to do our evaluations. Thank you so much. Do you want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about this QR code?
Yes, thank you, Leanne. I was just going to drop the link also in the chat, and I will go ahead and stop the recording when if we want to end this portion out for the webinar, and we can leave the Zoom room open for just a minute more. But I want to thank you again on behalf of the HETAC, Leanne and Carmina, for joining us today. I will drop the link for the survey in the chat, and we appreciate your feedback. If you can take a few minutes to do that, we'd appreciate that.
On behalf of CDE, we'd like to thank Denise and Alejandra and our HETAC team for hosting these, putting these up on the website, recording them, and making it a lot easier for all of us. I do want to give a shout out to Heidi Brahms and Jacqueline Matringa. Our team is all here. So the four of us are here, and I appreciate everyone being here. So thank you very much.